In this discussion, we're going to be looking at how you can get started using Windows 365. We're going to be talking about what is Windows 365 and the meaning of a cloud PC. We're going to be talking about all the requirements. We're then going to jump into the console and look at how you can get yourself started in your Windows 365 tenant as well. And then we're going to be talking about the user experience and finish off with some design decisions that you probably want to think about on your Windows 365 journey. And with me today, we're lucky to have Windows 365 specialist here, Nick Mosley, who is a cloud endpoint principal technical specialist from Microsoft.
Harry, I am so pleased to be on your show, and I look forward to sharing my knowledge on Windows 365 with you and with everyone else.
Awesome. So, Nick, can you just give us the high-level explanation of what is Windows 365 and how is this solution helping businesses today?
So, in short, Windows 365 is a new form of cloud compute. It provides a secure personal desktop experience for people from any device, anywhere. Plus, it's loved by admins because it's simple to deploy and to manage, and it has the familiar experience of Microsoft Endpoint Manager or Intune. Windows 365 Cloud PCs are great for a wide range of business cases, such as mergers and acquisitions, frontline worker access, working from home, bring your own PC, software developers, and more.
That's awesome. So I heard you mention more things in there, but one thing that stuck out for me was cloud PC. And that seems like a new term that we're defining. What does cloud PC mean for us, Nick?
Good observation. And simply put, a cloud PC is your work PC that is in the Microsoft Cloud. You'll be able to have the same Windows experience with access to your apps, your settings, your content, and more.
Brilliant. So when we think about Windows 365 and how we get started, as I do my research, there's a couple of options. I've seen that there's the Windows 365 for business and there's Windows 365 for enterprise. Can you talk to us, like, as we're starting, as people are jumping into this, why is there a difference here, and how would companies think about why they choose one over the other?
Yes, another good catch. So both versions have similar technical capabilities. Windows 365 for Business is designed for smaller companies with up to approximately 300 seats, and it has a basic provisioning and user experience. But on the flip side, Windows 365 Enterprise provides the full range of capabilities and features that are available to both admins and end users, such as there's enhanced provisioning options, there's monitoring capabilities, and troubleshooting tools.
Awesome. So for the smaller business, they can just jump in, get started with limited kind of configuration and different things that they've got to change. But for the enterprise, we can really make that a bit more granular on things that admins might want to set up. So as we'll spend our time in this conversation really focusing around the Windows 365 enterprises, what are some of the things that companies have to think about as they start adopting Windows 365? What are those requirements? What does it take to get started, Nick?
Okay. Well, fundamentally, the core prerequisites are broken into two pillars. You got licensing and you got technical. So licensing that is needed is Windows Enterprise or Windows E3, Microsoft Endpoint Manager, also known as Intune, and Azure AD Premium P1. Oh, actually, and one more, right? You still need a Windows 365 license, and that is tied to the size of the cloud PC. So whether it's two virtual CPUs or four virtual CPUs or 8 gigs of RAM or 16 gigs of RAM, that Windows 365 Cloud PC license will define the size of the cloud PC. So that's on the licensing side. And the technical requirements will vary from each use case. But a cloud native deployment of Windows 365 in and of itself has very little requirements.
Okay, so really, if we're jumping into the cloud native side, so we're thinking about Azure Active Directory, we're not really connecting back to the on-prem Active Directory here, is really it's one of the main decisions is what's the licensing SKU that you would need, which dictates how big the Windows 365 is from RAM, CPU. That makes sense. And I think, it's going to be helpful for us to see how we can deploy that. So Nick, if we just focus on that cloud only approach, I'd love it if you could just show us how easy it is to get started.
Oh, yes, of course. As you say, there are multiple decision points to deploy Windows 365. So, for example, if hybrid Azure AD join is necessary, or if cloud only Azure AD join is sufficient. And for those that are not aware, hybrid Azure AD join is where it's both cloud Azure AD as well as join to on-prem. That's what makes it hybrid. So that's a decision point. And often when I am personally assisting customers, we like to start, and I like to start as cloud native as possible, and use Azure AD authentication with Azure AD join. So let me show you how this works.
We'll begin in the Endpoint Manager console by going to Devices, and then under Provisioning is Windows 365. And when you select that, you'll see that there are no options available, which means we don't have any licenses yet. So let's go over to the Admin portal under Billing, Purchase Services, and then you click on the search box and we'll search for Windows 365. Scroll to the bottom where you will find the Windows 365 licenses, and you'll see they're available for both enterprise and business, as well as some other options. So we'll click on the details for enterprise, and then under plans and pricing, you can see all of the SKUs that are available. For a trial, we want to click on the drop-down list to select a plan, try for free, the 2 virtual CPUs with 8 gigabytes of RAM, and click Start Free Trial. Now, click Try Now. Then select Continue. And you'll be redirected back to the admin portal. So then under Billing and Licenses, you will find the trial license. Go ahead and select that. And next we want to assign a license to the person who will be doing the testing or POC of Windows 365. You can search for their name. Optionally, you can select the drop-down for Turn on Apps and Services to see what's available, and then click Assign. Back over to the Endpoint Manager console, and we want to click on Groups, All Groups, New Group, and based on your naming standards for your company, go ahead and enter a name. I'll just do Windows 365 for this demonstration, and you can add a description as necessary. And we're going to assign the same person that we gave the license to. And click Create. Next, we're going to go over to Devices. And under Provisioning in Windows 365, you can now see that we have everything available to us. So you can click on Provisioning Policies and then Create Policy. Here, again, enter a name that's going to meet your standards. I recommend something that is going to fit the properties of this PC configuration. So we're going to do Azure AD Join on a Microsoft hosted network in the West US 3 data center. Next, for the image type, I'm going to select a gallery image because it already has the optimizations built in for Windows 365. I'm going to select Windows 11 Enterprise with the Microsoft 365 apps and click Next. For the configuration, I'm going to select my additional languages as necessary and then additional services as necessary. Click Next. We are going to assign this provisioning policy to the same group that we just created, which has our test user. Now select it and then click Next and Create. Then we're going to go over to the user settings to create a user policy. Click Add, and you again give it a name that is based on your standards. And in this case, I am not going to enable the local administrator, and I am also going to allow the user to initiate a restore point, and those restore points are every 24 hours. I'm going to assign this to the same Windows 365 group that we created a moment ago. Click Next and Create. And now if we come over to all cloud PCs, we can see that our cloud PC is currently being provisioned for the user. Fast forward in time, about 30 minutes, and you can see that the PC has been provisioned. You can click on that Cloud PC to see the actions that are available to us as administrators. And then if you click on the three dots to the right, you'll see other capabilities, including some that are in preview.
Thanks so much, Nick, for walking through how easy it is to get started with Windows 365. It really doesn't take long at all. As we showed there, the Azure AD join approach to getting started. One of the common questions that I get though is, well, there's still some of our infrastructure on-prem that users may need to access. So the question is, how does that even work? Is that possible? Can we still connect to on-prem resources in our Windows 365 environment?
Oh, yes, yes, it is still possible. So you can create an Azure network connection that is done both within Azure and within the Windows 365 console in order to create that connectivity back to on-prem. And furthermore, if you have applications that are on-prem, which those users need to access, and that application uses, say, Kerberos or NTLM authentication, then you do have the ability to do that hybrid Azure AD join that I mentioned earlier to allow that to happen. And there's some other options as well around like application proxy that can, help fill that gap and that need. But there's no concern and no worries that if you still need to connect back to on-prem for some things, that you would be able to do that.
That's great. So depending on how we architect our Windows 365, we can get best of both worlds. We're not locked into cloud only. We understand that a lot of customers out there are gonna have environments that just inherently gonna have on-prem resources. So that's great. And I just love the simplicity of how to get started. But with that, we've walked through the getting started, some of the requirements. I think really what's left for us is to look at, well, how is the end user experience of this? Now that we've got ourselves a Windows 365 or a cloud PC, how does it look to get started?
Yes, and good point is that I showed you the admin experience of how to get a cloud PC provisioned and set up and accessible to the end user. But what is that end user experience actually like? So now let me show that to you.
We'll begin by opening a new tab and navigating to windows365.microsoft.com. Once logged in, we will get the welcome experience since this is our first time accessing a cloud PC. And in this view, we'll then be able to take a tour of all the capabilities. And if we had multiple cloud PCs, we would see them here. And if you click on the three dots, you can see the available actions to the end user that they can perform. Next, if you click on the download arrow, then you can see the remote desktop apps for other platforms. But here we're just going to do open in a browser. And as you can see, we have some in-session setting options. So we'll just click connect, enter our password. And now everything that you'll see will let you know that Windows 365 is just like a PC in the cloud. We have the Microsoft 365 apps that are installed. You'll see that Teams is going to launch here in just a moment for the first run. And then we also have browser access. So there's really nothing unique or special. It just opens up more cloud compute capabilities for many different types of people within your organization. And we can restart the cloud PC or disconnect.
That's brilliant, Nick. Really showing how easy it is to just as a user thinking about their personal cloud PC, how they can join and get started. But I think what's really interesting outside of what we think of, generally when we have traditional VDI and so on and so forth, there's no easy way for the user to interact with their Windows 365 machine or their VDI machine. But they're showing the ability to how we do rebooting and how we could roll back to maybe a previous state on our Windows 365. I think that adds some really interesting capabilities that kind of will help shift left some of the, oh, we got to create a support ticket every time our VDI machine goes wrong and so on and so forth. You could be much more in the moment. So with that said, there's obviously things that we have to think about on implementing Windows 365. I just wanted us to recap here then just what are again just some of those takeaways that if somebody's looking to get started with a Windows 365, what should they be thinking about from those kind of decision points?
To get started, so I would think and recommend for some key design decisions to really think about, okay, well, what are you meeting the licensing prerequisites? So again, remember Windows Enterprise, Azure AD Premium, P1, Intune, and of course the size of the VM, right? So thinking about those licensing prerequisites. Second, think about the size of the VMs based on your use case. So do you just have a frontline worker that needs to access, basic documents within Windows 365 environment? Then maybe four virtual CPUs and 8 gigs of RAM, two virtual CPUs and 8 gigs of RAM. Maybe that would be sufficient. Or maybe you have some developers which need a higher end system for consistent testing, which I will make a side note about that as a use case. So Microsoft recently announced DevBox, which is part of Windows 365 and Azure Virtual Desktop for developers specifically, but it's all still related. The same principles still apply. So think about that VM size for the use case. Next, you got to think about your Azure regions. So wherever you create an Azure network connection or an on-premises network connection, that's where the Azure VM or the cloud PC is going to reside. So if, for example, I live in Denver, I might want my Windows 365 Cloud PC to be kind of close to me for proximity reasons and connectivity. And so I might want to have that provisioned in like US West 3, for example. That's a supported region. So you got to think about those Azure regions where the users are based on the use case, and know that you got a plan for the Cloud PC to be in that region. Next is the networking. We already talked about this. Do you need to have the connection back to on-premises? The next one is identity. So think about not just the user's identity, but the identity of the device. So that is Azure AD Join or hybrid. Again, the hybrid is a big part of that is based on kind of some applications that may be on-prem and need Kerberos or NTLM authentication, or maybe you rely on GPO still and haven't converted those. And then finally, the last kind of decision point is Windows 10 or Windows 11. One thing I'll say is that Windows 365 is popular for customers to get started with and planning for and testing Windows 11. So I have several customers myself that are using Windows 365 to do some of that initial testing with Windows 11 rather than upgrading their physical endpoint to begin that testing. So those are kind of the key design decisions that I think any customer would want to think through as part of the early planning stages on a pilot production.
No, I love that, Nick. And I know what you said at the end there is that you can actually use Windows 365 to test Windows 11. I mean, obviously, different companies are trying to get educated on why Windows 11, what are the new features, how is this going to improve productivity, so on and so forth. And being able to just say, not have to worry about the hardware level of like, are the devices we have right now supported? I can just jump in there, try it out, and really get that hands-on experience. And you could even give that, I guess, to other users across the organization. Maybe try some business users. Are they interested in Windows 11? How does this work for them? Get that early feedback. So there's a few things that we still have to think about to get started. I had another question for you, Nick, here that I thought was interesting is, as you've done lots and lots of these deployments, proof of concepts, getting people started, where would you say generally the biggest challenge comes? What's the main hiccup to getting going quickly with Windows 365?
The main hiccup, I think it's in the design decisions and creating that on-premises network connection. So if you're unfamiliar with Azure and Azure networking and how that connects back to on-prem, reach out to your Microsoft account team to get some, kind of additional expert guidance in getting that created. I'd say that's probably the biggest challenge out of everything. Or if your organization is not accustomed to or using Intune yet for managing devices, that would probably be the other one, and just needing to gain some familiarity with how the solution works.
Yeah, that makes sense. So how do we make sure that the interconnection is correct, networking, and then just getting that experience on? Just how do we do endpoint management in Microsoft Intune? I'll put a few things, in the description, a couple of links of other resources as well. I think will be helpful for that training. But for you, Nick, for anyone, they've listened to this, they want to get started in their Windows 365 journey. Where would you recommend they start?
So you can find everything that you need to get started at aka.ms, Windows 365. And then there's also a blog that you can follow to stay updated on the latest enhancements. And that is at aka.ms/Windows 365 blog.
Awesome, Nick. Well, I've loved chatting today. Really enjoyed seeing how we can get started with Windows 365. So thank you so much for your time.
You're very welcome.